Montana Territory, April 1887, the storm rolled in fast, black clouds tumbling over the crazy mountains like a stampede. By the time Jackson Leland reached the edge of his property, the sky had cracked open and poured down as if the heavens themselves were splitting apart. Wind lashed at his oilskin coat, and lightning turned the prairie white for a blink of an eye at a time. He had come out looking for two of his cattle that had broken the fence line, but now it was too late. The storm was here. He turned his gelding back toward the homestead, the rain hitting so hard it stung. The barn was the first shape to come into view, then the low slope of his house. But as he passed the side of the house, something made him pull up short. The door to the storm cellar was open. He dismounted fast, heart thudding. He had closed that door himself 3 days ago. He moved quickly, boots slapping through the mud, and drew the cellar doors wide. There, at the bottom of the stone steps, crouched a girl. She was soaked through, her dress clinging to her bones, blonde hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked up at him with wide, dry eyes, not crying, not shaking, but she would not let go of the baby in her arms. Jackson stepped down slowly, hands open. "Miss," he said, voice low. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You're safe now." She pressed her back tighter against the wall. Her arms tightened around the baby, who looked no older than a few weeks. The child was silent too, swaddled in a threadbare blanket, face pink and warm, somehow untouched by the cold. "Name's Jackson Leland. This is my land. You're in my storm cellar." The girl blinked once, then again, still silent. "You hungry?" he asked, kneeling so he would not tower over her. "I got bread, real bread, not the hard kind, warm stove inside too." She looked down at the baby, then back at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. She nodded. Then, slowly, stood. Her arms never moved from the baby. She held him like something sacred, something she had bled to keep safe. Jackson led her into the house, through the kitchen door. Rain poured off the brim of his hat, puddling on the floor. He hung his coat by the stove and stoked the fire higher. She stood there, dripping, still clutching the baby. "Sit, please," he said, pulling out a chair. She sat stiffly, her eyes tracking every movement he made. He set a loaf of bread and a crock of butter on the table, poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "Eat, you need it." Only then did she speak, voice rough and soft like wind through dry grass. "Is it just you here?" Jackson nodded. "My sister and her husband moved to Helena last winter. I run the place alone now." She gave a slow nod. "I'll leave in the morning." "You don't have to, not until you're ready." Silence again. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Faye Jennings." Her voice shook on the second word like it cost her something. Jackson let the silence settle. He noticed how she kept one palm protectively cradled behind the baby's head, even while she reached for the bread with her free hand. She ate slowly, almost cautiously, like she was still unsure of her surroundings. He moved to the stove and ladled out some stew from the pot he had left simmering. He set the full bowl in front of her. She looked up at him, her eyes finally softening, just a little. "How old is he?" Jackson asked, nodding toward the baby. Faye looked down. 3 weeks, she said quietly. "His name's Jonah." Jackson leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Where's his father?" She didn't answer. He nodded once. He would not press. After she ate, he offered her a quilt and pointed her toward the small guest room off the back hallway. She stepped through the door without a word, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards. The baby never left her arms. Jackson stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. Then he went back out into the storm and bolted the cellar shut. The next morning, the sun came up clean and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Jackson found her in the kitchen, already awake, holding Jonah with one arm and using the other to pour water into a basin to wash her face. "I'll work," she said without turning. "I can cook, so." "I am not staying for free." Jackson leaned in the doorway, watching her. "You do not owe me anything." "I owe him a place to be safe." She looked down at Jonah. "And I do not have one." Then this is it, Jackson said. You stay as long as you need. You and the boy. Faye looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes were a pale, stormy green. Why? She whispered. Because everyone needs a place to start over. She said nothing, but her shoulders eased just a little. Over the next days, Faye moved with a quiet purpose. She swept the floors, cooked meals, and mended shirts without being asked. She never complained, never asked for anything. But she never let go of the baby, not once. She kept Jonah tied close to her chest all day, even while kneading dough or carrying water. At night, she took him into the guest room and kept the door closed. Jackson never asked why. He just made sure the wood box was full and that the house stayed warm. One afternoon, Faye was hanging laundry when the wind picked up again. She looked up, eyes narrowing at the sky. He came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. It is not another storm, just whined. Faye looked relieved but said nothing. You want to talk about it? He asked. She turned to him slowly. Would it change anything? No, Jackson said. But might make it easier. Faye's lips twitched, not quite a smile. I ran. From the man who said Jonah was not his. Jackson did not move. He told me to leave him behind, said no child of his would ever come from a girl like me. I left that night. Jackson's jaw tightened. How far did you walk? 4 days. I saw your storm cellar just before the rain started. He nodded once, then said gently, You never cried. No, she said, her voice steady. But I would not let go of him. I know. They stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at the line between them. Jackson stepped forward slowly. Faye, he said, you do not have to be afraid here. She nodded, and for the first time her arms loosened just slightly around the baby. He took that as a beginning. By the second week, new rhythms settled into the house like dust into old floorboards. Faye rose early, before the sky had fully shaken off the stars, and Jackson would hear the creak of the pump handle outside his window. She moved through her chores with a kind of quiet precision, never rushing, never idle. Jonah stayed close in a sling she'd fashioned from an old flannel sheet, his tiny face just beneath her collarbone, pink and calm. Jackson didn't say much in the mornings. He didn't need to. He'd saddle the gelding, ride the fence lines, check the troughs. When he came back in for coffee, the kitchen would smell of flour and something warm, and Faye would be standing there, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back with a strip of muslin. One morning, she was mending a torn saddle blanket on the porch when Jackson came back from the north pasture with his hat in his hand and a line of dust along his jaw. There's a coyote den near the creek, he said, sitting on the top step. 2 pups, maybe 3, small ones still. I'll have to move the herd farther west. Faye didn't look up from her stitching. Will you hurt them? Only if they come too close. She nodded, tying off the thread with a neat flick of her fingers. You ever worked stock? He asked after a while. No, she said. But I can learn. You take to it, he said. She looked at him then, her brow lifting slightly. You think so? You watch close. You don't waste motion. He picked up a splinter from the step and rolled it between his fingers. That's ranch work, mostly. Paying attention and not tiring yourself out too early. Faye glanced down at Jonah, who had fallen asleep with his mouth slightly open against her chest. He's not heavy yet, she said, but he will be. Jackson watched her a moment longer. I've got a cradle in the attic, he said. Used to be my sister's, I can bring it down. Faye's shoulders tensed slightly. He sleeps better near me. I figured. Wasn't offering to take him away, just thought your arms might want a rest now and again. She nodded slowly. All right. That evening, Jackson climbed the narrow attic ladder and came down carrying a cradle made of pine, worn smooth at the edges. Faye ran her hand along the side rail, tracing the tiny scratches from long, forgotten nights. I can clean it up, Jackson said. Sand it, maybe give it a fresh coat of oil. No, she said. Leave it like this. The next morning, she laid Jonah in it for the first time. He stirred, then settled, his fingers curling around the edge of the wool blanket. Faye stood with her hands at her sides, watching him sleep, her face unreadable. Jackson didn't disturb her. Later that day, he brought in a sack of dried apples and a new tin of coffee from the trading post in town. Faye was tending to the garden behind the house, knees in the dirt, sleeves damp with water. She looked up as he approached. "Figured you'd be needing these," he said, setting the sack near her feet. "I was," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thank you," he hesitated, then crouched beside her. "You ever kept a garden before?" "No," she said, "but I know how to listen." "To the plants," she nodded. "If you're quiet, they tell you what they need." Jackson looked at the small green shoots pushing up through the soil. "That's so," she smiled then, barely, and brushed hair from her face. "You think I'm odd?" "I think you've survived what should have broken you," he said. "That's not odd, that's rare." She looked away, her fingers pressing gently into the earth. "Do you miss where you're from?" he asked. "I don't miss the place," she said, "but I miss knowing what day it is by the sound of the church bell." Jackson nodded. "Out here, you know by the wind and whether the creek's running high. That's lonelier." "Sometimes," he said. "Then other times, it's not." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away when his shoulder brushed hers as they knelt side by side in the garden. That night, Jackson sat on the porch while Faye rocked Jonah in the cradle. The baby had started to smile in his sleep, soft little twitches around the mouth that made Faye pause each time, as if memorizing them. The lantern burned low, and the air was cool with the smell of sage and pine smoke. "Will you teach me to ride?" she asked, not looking up. He turned toward her. "He'll need a mother who can keep up." "Yes," she said, "and I want to know how to move forward without running." Jackson leaned back into the porch rail. "We'll start tomorrow." Faye looked over at him, and for the first time there was something unguarded in her expression, not quite trust. But close, she reached into the cradle and gently touched Jonah's cheek with the back of her finger. "He's safe here," she said quietly. "That's what matters most." Jackson nodded, watching her in the lantern light. "You are too," he said, "whether you believe it yet or not." By late May, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out thick, their shadows long and cool across the pasture fence. Jackson had started letting Faye ride short distances on the sorrel mare, steady-footed and calm, while he walked alongside on the gelding. She didn't speak much while riding, but her hands had steadied on the reins, and her back no longer tensed when the horse shifted beneath her. One afternoon, they turned toward the western ridge where wild chokecherry grew along the slope. Faye pulled the mare to a halt and pointed to a patch of brush along the ravine's edge. "There's a rabbit in there," she said. Jackson shaded his eyes. "You've got good eyes." "I used to snare them with thread and twigs," she said. "Back before." He didn't ask what before meant. He just nodded and said, "Plenty of them out here. Might be worth setting a line if we're low come fall." Faye dismounted and stepped off the narrow trail, brushing aside a branch. "This land, it doesn't feel like it's holding its breath the way some places do." Jackson stayed quiet, watching her kneel near the brush, her fingers brushing across a patch of moss. She stood again and looked back toward the house, just visible through the trees. "What made you stay?" she asked. "After the war ended, I wandered a while. Missouri, Kansas, didn't sit right in my bones. My sister's husband offered me a corner of this land. I built up from there." "You built all of it yourself?" "Most of it." "Got good at making do." She nodded, then asked, "You ever think of leaving?" "Once," he said. "But I didn't." "Why not?" Jackson looked out across the valley. "I figured I'd put enough of myself into this place. If I left, I'd be hollow walking somewhere else." Faye didn't reply, but her gaze lingered on him longer than usual. When they returned, the sun had begun to sink low, and Jonah had stirred from sleep. His cries were soft and hoarse, more protest than panic. Jackson moved to take the bridle from the mare, but Faye stepped in and reached for his arm. "I'll do it," she said. "You've done enough today." He handed over the reins. "You're getting steadier." "I stopped being afraid yesterday," she said. "Today I just want to be good at it." Inside, she peeled an apple with careful hands, thin curls falling into the bowl. Jonah sat in a basket near the stove, staring at the flicker of the flame with quiet fascination. "Did you ever think about marrying?" she asked as she cut the slices in half. Jackson set down the tin cup he'd been holding. "I've thought about it." She didn't look up. "What stopped you?" "Never met anyone who looked me in the eye like it meant something." She finished slicing and pushed the bowl across the table. "I didn't expect to ask that." "I just did." He picked up a slice. "I didn't expect to answer, but I did." Faye rested her elbows on the table. "I wonder if there's a part of me that still waits for the sound of his boots, even knowing he won't come." Jackson didn't flinch, but he set the apple slice down. "That's not something you need to carry by yourself." "I'm not afraid of remembering," she said. "I'm afraid of forgetting and not knowing who that made me." "You're still her," he said, "but you're someone new too." She looked toward the cradle. "He's starting to know my voice." Jackson followed her gaze. "He'll know you by your steadiness." That night, she didn't shut the guest room door. Jackson noticed it when he passed by with the lamp. A narrow strip of light fell across the wooden floor, and inside, Faye sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on Jonah's chest, her shoulders curved in a way that no longer looked like fear. He didn't speak, just paused in the hallway. She looked up, and for a breath they held each other's gaze across the dim light. "You sleep all right?" he asked finally. "I do now," she said. "The house has a sound to it. It settles after sundown. Most houses do. But this one does it like it's exhaling," she said softly. Jackson nodded, then turned to go. "Jackson," he stopped. "Thank you for not asking me to be anything I'm not ready to be." "I want you to be exactly who you are," he said, "and I'll wait as long as that takes." She didn't answer, but she left the door open through the night. On the first hot morning of June, when the dew had barely dried from the porch rail, Jackson found Faye kneeling in the barn beside the lamb that had been born too early. Its breathing was shallow and quick, the wool still slick with afterbirth. She had stripped off her overskirt and laid it beneath the creature, her hands steady beneath its head. "I heard the ewe crying," she said without looking up. "She was turned wrong. I helped." Jackson crouched beside her. He could see the way her fingers cupped the lamb's jaw, her thumb pressing just lightly under its chin. "You did right," he said. "She's breathing." "She's not warm enough," Faye murmured. He stood and fetched a saddle blanket from the tack wall, returned and held it open. Faye wrapped it around the lamb and pulled it close to her chest, her eyes fixed downward. "Do you want me to try and feed her?" Jackson asked. "Not yet," she said. "She's not ready." He sat beside her then, the hay biting through his trousers, the smell of blood and afterbirth sharp in the air. She didn't speak again, but he could see the way her jaw had set not in fear, but in that quiet, rooted way she had when something needed doing. By noon, the lamb was suckling from a makeshift bottle. Faye had stripped off her blouse and held the animal against her skin, her arms curled protectively around it, the same way she'd held Jonah that first night in the cellar. When the lamb finally slept, its legs twitching slightly, she exhaled slowly and rested her cheek against its damp head. "You're good with the things that haven't had a fair start," Jackson said softly. She looked up at him. "I know what it feels like to need saving without asking for it." He didn't move. "You've got a gift for living things." "I don't know that I'd call it a gift," she said. "It just hurts less to try than to watch them die." That night, she asked if the lamb could stay in the kitchen until she was stronger. Jackson nodded without hesitation and helped her rig a crate with straw and a slop bucket so the animal wouldn't soil the floorboards. Faye barely left its side until the fire burned down to coals. When she finally rose, she pressed her hand against Jonah's back in the cradle. He stirred, then sighed and settled. She turned to Jackson, standing near the hearth. "You ever wanted children?" she asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I think I always figured I might, but I never put it into words." She stepped closer, her fingers twitching at her sides. "I never thought I'd be a mother. I didn't think I'd survive long enough." "You have," he said. You're doing more than surviving now. She looked at him for a long moment, then took a breath. Would you hold him? Jackson's throat worked once before he nodded. She lifted Jonah from the cradle and placed him carefully in his arms. The baby stirred, opened his eyes briefly, then settled again, one small hand curling into Jackson's shirt. Faye stepped back, watching. He doesn't cry as much anymore. I think he knows he's safe now, Jackson said. She smiled small and real and folded her hands behind her back. He's heavier than he was. I didn't notice until just now. You've been carrying him every minute. Sometimes the weight becomes part of you. Her eyes flicked to his face. Is that how this feels to you, like we've become part of the place? He didn't answer right away. He looked down at Jonah, then back at her. It feels like I've stopped waiting. Faye reached out and touched the baby's hand. And started what? Building something that might hold, he said. Neither moved for a long while. Outside, the wind dipped low through the grass, and the lamb shifted in her sleep, hooves tapping lightly against the wood. Faye looked at the cradle, then the hearth, then Jackson. I don't want to leave, she said. You don't have to, he said, voice low. I want to stay because I choose to. Not because I have nowhere else. You choose, and I'll build around that. Her voice caught slightly. Can we raise him here, with the quiet and the wind and the lamb in the kitchen? Jackson stepped closer and kissed her forehead, his hand still gentle on Jonah's back. We already are. And for the first time since the storm cellar, Faye leaned fully into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her arms circling them both. The fire hissed softly behind them. Outside, the land exhaled again. The creek ran lower by midsummer, its beds scattered with flat stones and tangled roots. Jackson had taken to walking the bank before supper, boots cutting a steady rhythm through the dust. Faye sometimes joined him, Jonah cradled on her hip, the lamb now trailing along like a stubborn dog, bleating softly when it fell behind. One evening, after the herd had been rotated to higher pasture and the garden weeded down to clean rows, Jackson sat sharpening a drawknife on the back step. Faye appeared in the doorway, a folded scrap of paper in her hand. It came in the post, she said. He set the blade aside. From Helena, she nodded. Your sister wrote. He took the paper and read it slowly, the edges gone soft from travel. She wants to come visit before snow, he said. Wants to meet you, meet Jonah. Faye leaned against the door frame. Do you want that? I do, he said. She hesitated. I never met family who asked first. She's not like most, Jackson said. Neither are you. Faye looked down at her hands. I don't know how to be seen by someone who knew you before I did. They'll see what I see, he said. That'll be enough. She stepped outside, the hem of her dress brushing the step. How do you know? Because you didn't ask to be loved, he said. And that's how I knew I did. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached for his hand and placed it against Jonah's back where the boy now slept with his cheek against her collarbone. I want to marry you, Jackson said. Faye's breath caught, but her eyes didn't leave his. I don't have a dowry. I have land and shelter, he said. You have courage and a heart that doesn't flinch. That's what I need. I'm still learning how to live without fear. I'll walk beside you, he said, every inch of the way. She nodded once, slow and certain. Then yes. They were married in early September beneath the cottonwoods, the creek still whispering low behind them. Jackson wore his best shirt, the seams ironed flat. Faye wore a dress the color of wheat, one she had sewn herself, simple and strong. She held Jonah in her arms as they exchanged vows, and when Jackson placed the ring on her hand, the boy reached out and curled his fingers around them both. The preacher from town said a prayer that caught in the hush of the trees. No one else attended but the wind and the grass and the sky that opened wide above them. Afterward, Jackson led her back to the house, their steps unhurried. He had scrubbed the floorboards spotless and laid a sprig of pine on the windowsill. Faye paused in the doorway, taking it all in. I never thought I'd come home to something I hadn't imagined first, she said. He stepped behind her, his hand at her waist. This is just the beginning. They settled into the days with a new rhythm. The lamb grew taller, bolder, and Jonah learned to crawl across the floorboards, his laugh small and sudden, like bird call. Faye planted garlic and onion in the garden's far corner and began stitching a quilt from old shirts and flour sacks. Jackson taught her how to read the weather by the shape of the clouds and how to notch fence posts by feel alone. One night, as the first frost curled over the porch rail, Faye stood by the stove, her fingers tracing the edge of the cradle Jonah had long since outgrown. "I want to build another," she said. Jackson looked up from the ledger. "Another cradle, another child," she said. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands finding hers. "Then we will." She leaned into him, her voice low against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd want to bring another into this world. But here, with you, we make it different," he said. They did. That winter passed with hard snow and long nights, but the house held warmth, and the days carried meaning. When spring returned, it brought new life with it, buds pushing through thawed earth. Rabbits lined in fur along the barn eaves, and Faye, rounding gently with child as the sun climbed higher each day. Years stretched steady from that point on. They raised Jonah with quiet dignity, teaching him to listen before speaking, to treat the land like something borrowed. The second child came on a soft April morning, a girl with hair the color of sun-warmed straw and her mother's steady gaze. They named her Mercy. Faye stitched her name into the quilt, not loud or showy, just a single thread in the corner where it wouldn't fade. As time went on, the land gave more than it took. The creek kept running, even in dry years. The garden grew deep roots. The lamb lived 5 good years before she was buried beneath the cottonwoods, and they planted wildflowers over the spot. Faye never once shut the door to the guest room again. It became a sewing room, and then a schoolroom with chalk and slates, and finally a nursery once more. Jackson never left the ridge, not once. He didn't need to. Everything he'd ever wanted stood beside him each morning, hand in hand, foot on solid ground. And Faye, who had once crouched in the dark with nothing but instinct and a child in her arms, now stood tall in the light, a woman remade not by rescue, but by choosing to stay, to trust, to love. In the end, there was no storm left in her, only sky.